Hello and welcome to the big picture. The RBI has come out with its bi-monthly monetary policy statement today, disappointing those who were expecting interest rate cuts. The RBI governor has made it clear that the time was not ripe for a review of the repo rate as well as the CRR rate. He wants to wait for another couple of months and see whether inflation's downward movement will sustain before taking a decision. It was felt that the government was expecting a rate cut to promote investments, even though most analysts did not expect any reduction. So what will be the impact of the status quo policy of the RBI on the economy and on investments? Did Raghuram Rajan have any other choice? We will discuss all this today with Renu, Kohli, former staff member of the RBI and International Monetary Fund, Dr. Santosh, Mehrotra, Director General, Institute of Applied Manpower Research, Professor N.R. Bhanumurthy, Member, National Institute of Public Finance and Policy, and Subhomoy Bhattacharya, Deputy Editor, The Indian Express. Welcome to all of you. Renu, I'd like to come to you first. Raghuram Rajan says that, this is not the time is not ripe for, going in for any changes. Do you agree with him?
It's hard to give a completely unqualified agreement or disagreement with the governor. But let me put it this way. If you take into account the Reserve Bank's new monetary policy framework, then yes, I would say that I would go with the governor and agree that it was a bit premature, and for the reasons that he put out about the extent of disinflationary momentum, the fact that there is a certain bit of uncertainty because the base inflation rate was very high last year, and we need one more data point at least in December, and by January we will know exactly as to what the extent of the base influence upon current inflation rates. The extent of the food price increases that are not very clear at the moment. So in that sense, yes, I would agree, and I was amongst those who did not really expect the RBI to move at this point.
Why don't you? What is it that you don't agree about? You said partly you agree, partly you don't agree.
No, I didn't say that. I said that if you take into account that the Reserve Bank has moved to a new monetary policy framework, which is that of inflation targeting, and that has been in place. It was accepted informally in January 2014, and that is the part. But that is the part which I am not very comfortable with for various reasons, and this is not the time to, or this is not the occasion to go into that. But what I meant to say was that if you accept that inflation targeting framework, then of course, in that sense, it wasn't really appropriate for the RBI to move at this point.
Okay. Bhanumurthy, inflation targeting, this has been going on. You think the RBI is on the right track? You think the government is comfortable with this?
Well, I'm not really sure about government's perception on this, but the many analysts really, disagree with the starting point of what the monetary policy in India, that is inflation targeting. So it all started on the first day when the governor has taken up. But over the period of time, I think there is some kind of pragmatism in terms of the policy that RBI governor thinks.
The figures show that the inflation has come under control.
No, let me come to that. So in terms of inflation targeting, I've been taking a position that the Urjit Patel committee is a very hurriedly done report, I must say. Within 3 months' time, you come out with a policy for a monetary policy for medium to long term and focusing more on the inflation targeting. I don't think India is ready for that. To be fair, even the inflation targeting countries at the moment are actually having a second opinion, second thoughts on that aspect. And that's one of the reasons why, despite inflation has come down, much lower than what 8% or much lower than 6% target that they're talking about for 2016,
right,
until the expectations for January. The central bank is unable to reduce interest rate because they are sticking to some philosophy. We really don't know whether it is applicable to India. But at the same time, there are some kind of monetary easing happening on a different, if you look at different indicators, particularly on the liquidity as well as the call money rates, if you look at, there are some monetary easing happening. In a sense, the monetary policy, in my opinion, we don't really need to look at only at the repo rate and CRR. There are other ways of easing monetary conditions in the country, which is being done. But
like
this liquidity issues, I mean, which is visible in the call money rates. But at the same time, this press note actually points out to two issues, which I think one needs to really debate. Is something on the monetary transmission mechanism. Subtly, they are saying, which we have been discussing, I think in the previous shows also we have discussed, that we are not, at the moment, the interest rate channel is, in the central bank's opinion, I think interest rate channel is not the channel that needs to focus now. I think even we have been taking that even if you reduce the repo rate, we are not going to see that transmission from repo rate to lending rate. It is happening from repo rate to deposit rate. So it is not going to revive investments, I mean, per se, if you reduce the repo rate also.
That is what the governor keeps repeating quite often, you know. And today, it's very interestingly, he said he has hinted that the banks can actually reduce the rates because the call money rates have come down and things like that.
He is also, putting blame on the corporates, how they were taking the risk and all
exactly,
this.
they are not taking the risk. Yeah. Santosh, how do you look at this? You know, this whole debate on, inflation targeting?
I'm in complete agreement with Bhanu when he says that the Urjit Patel report was very hurriedly done and not thought through. And I would re-emphasize and underline the point that Bhanu was making, that the transmission mechanisms don't exist in our economy from interest rate to inflation control. So just keeping interest rates high is not necessarily the factor which is driving inflation rates down. Inflation rates have come down for a very important reason, which is fortuitous, which has got to do with oil prices, international oil prices coming down. And we should always sort of remind ourselves that the transmission mechanisms in our economy from monetary policy to inflation don't exist for the following reason, that half of the weight of CPI is accounted for by food now, and food is not impacted. The demand for food is relatively inelastic and is not impacted by inflation. What oil and fuel is not impacted, and that's about 23% in the CPI. Because that's impacted by international prices. So what is left, what you are left with is essentially core manufacturing, non-food inflation. That's all that is impacted by the interest rate. So it's a pity that, the Patel Committee reports framework has now become the dominant framework. But my two colleagues earlier seem to be unsure about what the government's point of view is. I thought the government's point of view is sort of fairly straightforward. They would have expected a decline, exactly. And that's what industry was expecting as well.
The government was expecting, the industry was expecting, but the RBI governor is sticking to his stand. All the three economists on this panel feel that this, what he is doing, the framework in which he is working is not exactly what they like. How do you look at it, Subhomoy?
Well, I'm not very sure about whether the industry's demand is genuine, because a good percentage of the reason why we are in this mess industrially is because of the fact that there's a huge overhang of NPA in the sector. And that was taken precisely because of the time when the interest rates was pretty good, pretty soft rather. And that has...
nobody talks of NPA.
And nobody talks on, and it was in question, it was given out, and we are in a position where the economy is actually carrying, that is an interest cost burden. And that burden is being shared by the rest of the economy. The Indian government, the Indian banking sector is public sector dominated. So whatever happens to the recapitalization and everything is a cost on the rest of the economy. So now to say that if we reduce the interest rate, well, sure enough, there are good arguments, I would say, but if we reduce the interest rates, and if industry, without having really shown, and large percentage of it have not really shown that they have actually improved the way that they do their business, then we jolly well are saying that good times would be there but not necessarily good for the rest of the economy. Whereas Governor Rajan is very clear that we have a problem in terms of the agricultural sector. Now, I agree with Dr. Mehrotra when he says that the transmission mechanism is not clear, but that today's press statement makes it very clear that that is the present danger. The agriculture in both in Rabi will not be as good. Kharif has been bad. So there is a pressure that is going to come up from there. And only redeeming feature right now is the oil. So if inflation...
And that also we don't know how long it will...
Right. And the base effect is going to be away by, going to go away by mid-December, as Renu Kohli pointed out. So therefore, we would like to know, or rather the one more data point would be necessary to see whether inflation has secularly declined. If it is not, then there is a risk in the system.
Actually, that's what Raghuram Rajan also says. Renu, that's what Governor Raghuram Rajan says.
I just wanted to add to...
Yeah, I'll just finish my question. You can add to that. Or you can respond.
Add to what?
You can respond to that. You can respond to my question also. No, my question is this: that the Governor of Reserve Bank of India says very clearly that we need more time to look at whether this downward trend in inflation is sustainable. And he is as Subhomoy was pointing out, there are certain uncertainties there, which so there is no need to jump at this point of time, and again later. He says very clearly, later we'll have to again, raise the interest rate, so we would rather wait. Don't you think that's a very sensible way of looking at it?
Certainly, I would say that is sensible. Central banks have to be cautious. By nature, they are cautious, and they have to take a slightly longer term view, and they have to be sure that there is no resurgence of inflationary pressures. Just yesterday, the November's manufacturing PMI came out, and that showed that there is a resurgence of pricing pressures.
Right.
And therefore, it's very important. I think the governor is completely justified in taking that view. Having said that, let me just add to what the points that Subhomoy made about industry and high interest costs and the extent of leverage in the economy.
And
the leverage
NPAs.
in the economy, any economy which is highly leveraged, and when it has to work out the excesses of debt, that takes time, and that is a process underway. But more important than that, let me just add to that, is this fact that there is an excessive interest rate focus at this point. It's in just a year's time. Let's go back to last year, for example. In July-September, growth in July to September 2013 was 5.2%. In July-September 2014, growth is just about the same. It's about 5.3%.
Right.
There isn't much of a difference. But last year, investment, the decline in investment, or the feebleness in investment demand was being attributed completely to policy uncertainty,
right.
policy paralysis, and
right.
so on. Nobody was really talking about interest rates.
Right.
And now suddenly 1 year down the line, the entire focus is completely upon interest rates and how they are impacting and hurting investment. Now, there is a bit of sudden turnaround, and I wonder as to what has happened to policy paralysis, policy certainty, uncertainty, etc., and its relationship with investment.
Very important point made there. I think she's made a very important point there. Sudden turnaround she talks about. The sudden turnaround is of the analysts, not anybody else. The analysts don't seem to be talking of, policy paralysis. It's only interest rates now.
Not analysts, but in general, the demand for wherever the demand for interest rate cuts might be coming from.
No, but
right.
I think just to correct Renu, the interest rate demand, cut in interest rate demand is there for past 2 years.
Yeah, we have been talking about it.
If you have seen the way the previous government was twisted.
What she means is the focus was on policy paralysis.
I mentioned the relationship between investment and interest rates.
Absolutely. Obviously, the last year we were all talking of this policy paralysis. The government is not working. That's why all these things happening. Now apparently the government is supposed to be working. The government is supposed to be active. There are a lot of steps which have been taken, though it will need time for all those steps to fructify and But the problem is that there are two or three things.
Yeah, those times.
Sorry.
Yeah,
no, I'm saying that exactly. There has to be some time for these effects to percolate through.
Absolutely. Bhanumurthy, when he talks of Raghuram Rajan talks of waiting and things like that, there are two things which he talks about. One is of tax revenue realization. He seems to be still very, not very sure of what the tax revenue realization is. There are indications that it may go down and things like that. The other thing he talks is about slow pace in disinvestment. So these are two ponderables which he wants to wait and see how it will all work out.
Basically, broadly, I think what he's talking is that he's not sure about 4.1% fiscal deficit target. Okay. In that sense, yes, I mean, the worry is justified, particularly.
So actually, he's putting the ball in the court of the government.
Yeah, if you see the last paragraph,
right.
I mean, there's so many things that he has told for the finance ministry to do it. I think in terms of the sectoral policies, in terms of bringing, addressing some structural issues.
Exactly.
So, and also the fiscal side.
Right.
I mean, he's actually putting subtly that the finance ministry and the government needs to walk the talk in terms of...
No, in fact, he's maybe trying to say that first you prove yourself, then you come to me.
Well, I think that's what. I think he's basically trying to say that please walk the talk in terms of whatever you are saying. And also, there's the link between the sentiments versus fundamentals is something very important at this juncture. I mean, there is a very, very positive sentiments building up in the country. But the
stock markets are,
yeah, but if you look at the fundamentals, not really. I mean,
it doesn't reflect in the fundamentals.
Yeah, so I think that needs to be kept in mind when we see about the investment revival.
So that means that, Santosh, actually the cautious approach which he's adopting is justified, despite your reservations, the reservations of all three of you actually.
I have difficulty in convincing myself that one of the few instruments that we've had in actually sort of turning things around, because clearly that opportunity is being lost. We cannot but remind ourselves that while Subhomoy is right that interest costs are relatively small as a proportion of total input costs for large companies, although he didn't make that point, he's making a larger point about how this is impacting NPAs. The fact is the following, that for small companies and for medium companies, interest cost as a proportion of total input costs are much higher than they used to be. And now that's a problem. To say that that's not impacting investment is a red herring. It's unfortunate that people are not aware of this and not recognizing this. Investment is not simply investment by large corporates. Investment is by medium firms and by small firms who constitute the 95% of the total enterprises in our economy. So, to say that interest rates don't matter is actually is a misunderstanding of the situation.
It doesn't matter, but it doesn't matter as much as it is argued.
No, I think our argument, some of us are making argument that there are very few transmission mechanisms from inflation targeting to actually control inflation. In other words, inflation targeting through monetary policy and actual control.
No, but inflation. what about the governor's hints to the government that first you prove yourself and then come to me?
No, that's a fair point.
That's a fair point.
That's a fair point.
You agree that that what he is saying to the government is something which he should have said, and he needs to be cautious and wait.
Indirectly, the monetary policy rules can be achieved if you have a tight fiscal rules.
Right.
I think that is what he is trying to make.
Subhomoy?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm not talking about transmission cost at all. I'm simply saying the total cost of the interests of the interest burden that has been, the entire NPA structure that has been put on the economy is something that will have to be played through. Now, somebody has to pick up the cost. Unless those sort of costs considerably run their way.
What is this? Today also, in fact, I was reading that RBI is offering more flexibility to banks to restructure their debt.
Absolutely. That sort of stuff. So, unless those things are played through, it's very difficult for a governor to stand up and say, we have taken care of it and now we can move on to the next
So, he's aware
dimension.
of this problem. So, he's offering a debt restructuring model.
And also, if you look at it in India, nothing happens without politics. So, look at it this way, that the governor, the finance ministry itself has removed 3 of its key officers and has brought in a fresh set just recently.
Right.
So, assuming that most of the policies and others where actually there was something, there was a tandem that was there with them, that has been removed. There's a new set that has come in. I suppose he could also say that, come along, let me wait and see how this new set of people play out, what is their point of view. Let me come closer to the budget, and then I'll take a decision on a rate cut, because once I've done it, it's very difficult to go back. So I think that's a fair call.
No, but what about the caution which the RBI governor seems to have, or made about tax? I mean, the revenue, tax
Girish,
revenue.
You are absolutely right.
Tax revenue because
is actually not growing.
It's not growing.
It's growing at. In fact, direct tax revenue is just about 6 to 7%. So
right.
it's in a very bad shape. And
you have just 3 months to make up for it.
Right. And I would rather say that today's decision is actually the reverse of being cautious. It would have been cautious if he had actually cut rates, because that was a generally accepted thing when the finance minister was also saying that, cut rates. But by standing against the wind, he's actually made a rather bold position that, that I'll not cut rates till I see more positive signals which will outweigh the negative signals.
So that means that, Renu, that means that there's still actually, as Bhanumurthy was pointing out, the actual positive signals are really not there still so far.
On what? I mean, I didn't get positive signals upon what?
No, on, say, tax revenue realization, the disinvestment process, they have not been able to, get it going.
I got it. I got it.
Yeah.
My reading of the statement, I did not really perceive it as putting the ball in the government court, simply because monetary and fiscal policies never operate in isolation, and they are never set in, at least monetary policy, I know for sure, is not set in isolation from fiscal policy. And this is a perennial in the sense that at every statement and at every juncture, the monetary policy always factors in as to what the fiscal stance is and how it is going to evolve in the future. And therefore, if a central bank is saying that there is a bit of uncertainty about the fiscal deficit, target, etc., so they do need to know whether there will be overshooting or the consolidation will proceed as projected. And that has a bearing upon inflation, and it is very much the central bank's task to look at it. So I actually did not see it as putting in the government's court. The second thing, what they said in relation to core growth, and they actually said something very positive, because they said that all the actions that are being taken on mining, this, that, and removing the bottlenecks upon the infrastructure thing, and they still anticipate that these will feed through, and therefore they have actually kept their GDP growth projections, even as they have lowered their projections on inflation. So all the conditions are there, and they have pretty much indicated, the RBI has pretty much indicated that early next year they would be able to take a view, and that is, I think, a large chunk of that is upon the base effects, how they play out.
Exactly.
The second point about investment revival.
Right.
That is, I think, if we look at the aggregate capacity utilization rate in the manufacturing segment is about, 60 to 65%. And we cannot ignore the external impulses. And if that is the capacity utilization rate, it's a long way to go before firms even contemplate fresh investments or fresh capacity additions. They've got a long way to go just in, increasing their capacity utilization rate. So investment, I think, revival will take time. Where it can come from is where there is a huge deficit, which is on the infrastructure front. And there again, the issues are well known and we need not go into there. There is not much in the hand of the Reserve Bank, unfortunately, on the infrastructure spending front revival. There are structural bottlenecks. On the cyclical side, what is actually impacting infrastructure is financing.
Absolutely.
There is a huge accumulation of debt, past debt. The debt overhang is a big stumbling block. And also, if you are trying to build a highway, or if you want to build a port or anything for that matter, you do have to project demand. And
Absolutely.
if the demand projections are that, what you projected, say 8% earlier, firms are not going to invest. So, that is the point at which the cycle has been for the last 1 or 2 years. And
yes, Bhanumurthy?
Yeah, actually, just to add to what Renu has said, in fact, if you look at this statement, one sentence says that monetary policy stance is likely to change next year, depending on the fiscal developments, whether they are
exactly.
encouraging or not.
There is a conditional. It's a conditional thing.
So I think there is some kind of pessimism in terms of revenue projections. See, the revenue projections was taken up based on 13.7% nominal GDP growth. Now, given these recent trends in inflation as well as GDP, you are not going to see more than 10% in the nominal GDP growth. So I think that is the risk on the fiscal side. And on the growth side, if you look at the report again, they are sticking to 5.5%.
Right.
What it means is that the first half we are almost close to 5.5% if you take first quarter and second quarter. And we are not going to see any great revival in the growth in the second half also. In that sense, I think they are slightly underestimating growth in my view.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Santosh, Renu was pointing out about the manufacturing sector and things like that. 65% capacity, there is not much. Talking of fresh investments at this stage when they are not even producing to their capacity is something which we need to take note of. One second thing is employment generation, which is your area. Is that happening at all in the last 6 months? Has there been any improvement?
Well, on the manufacturing, I think it's a fair point that Renu is making, but at the same time, it's not as though that the data tells us about what the level of capacity utilization is in small and medium enterprises, which, as I said earlier, account for the majority of total enterprises. They may not account for most of the output. Most of the output is accounted for by the larger enterprises. But, I don't know whether that data exists for the small and medium enterprises.
If you look at the economy-wide, if you see that ICOR number,
right,
that itself is more than 5.5. I mean, that should give you a slightly...
But the ICOR could very well be high because of the large... because of the large number of infrastructure.
Santosh, we are running out of time. Running out of time. What is your point? As far as employment is concerned, manufacturing still, taking its own time. Employment, we don't see any... Have we seen any positive...
No, there isn't data which can actually tell us about what's happening on employment, but it's highly likely that at the bottom of the distribution of income and the distribution of wages and skills, there is a demand out there which is actually being met by the unorganized sector. I mean, because there was a very dramatic decline in poverty and a large increase in wages.
That is a separate, completely.
No, the point is employment is likely to have been sustained in the small enterprises.
Has been sustained. It's not grown, but it has been sustained.
Right,
very quick last words to you.
Yeah, the one sector which would have been interested in interest rate decline is housing loan and consumer loans.
Exactly.
And
those two things are not happening in that.
And those two things immediately are not happening despite even if the RBI had cut rates, simply because our bank's cost of deposit mobilization is still high.
Okay. I think on that note, we need to end. As far as the common man is concerned, the EMIs are not going to reduce. We'll have to wait for some more time. As far as the larger economy is concerned, we'll have to wait and watch how these measures will help it. Thanks to all my guests, Renu, Kohli, Santosh, Mehrotra, NR Bhanumurthy and Subhomoy Bhattacharya. Please keep watching. We'll come back with another issue on the big picture same time tomorrow.